Show me your face. Thank you. Did you ever hear back from Paul
What do you mean?
about like when you're gonna talk to Noelle?
No.
Okay. Okay, let me open.
Huh?
Let me open. We
Whoa.
should draw later.
Yeah, I should find my phone. Hold
Do
on.
that.
Ah. Oh.
I was getting ready to
Found it.
call you.
I was in my blankies.
My blinkies. Okay, do you remember what happened last time?
Um, I was getting on that boat.
Yeah, they were at Rainmaster's house, and then Pei Ming showed up and was like, "Your brother's going through his third heavenly calamity, and he doesn't know where the fuck you are or what happened to you, and it's distracting him." So then Shi Qingchuan went with him, and Ming Yi tried to stop him because he's like, "Your brother is an asshole because he fucked this shit up." But then Shi Jingxuan still went, and so Ming Yi went with him, and then no one else was available to help get these fishermen out of the area, so Shi Lian went, and Hua Cheng was there disguised as a fisherman, and they shared
Right.
food together.
His gay little fisherman outfit.
Yeah, and Pei Ming was like hitting on women fishermen,
Yeah.
and Ming Yi and Shi Jingxuan were like, ew. And then the ship started like sinking a little bit, and they figured that they drifted into Black Water Demon's lair.
Whoa. It's so scary.
Alright, chapter 62. Ships in the lair of ghosts shall sink. One of the four supremes, ship sinking black water? Shi Lian asked. For calamities, not for supremes. Only then did Shi Lian realize that he had subconsciously removed Shi Rong from the calamity ranks. This was likely because there was no way he could put Night Touring Green Lantern on the same level as the other three. As someone who had dutifully crammed with informative scrolls, Shi Lian knew a bit about ship sinking Blackwater. According to legend, he was a great and powerful water ghost who lurked in the outer seas. Like Crimson Rain sought Flower, he slaughtered his way out of Mount Tonglu. Although he tended to keep a low profile, that profile was only low in the mortal and heavenly realms. He had devoured over 500 infamous, nefarious creatures across the land, about 400 of which were other high-level water ghosts. The Blackwater Demon Lair was his personal domain. Just as Ghost City was under Hua Cheng's jurisdiction alone, lawlessness reigned within these boundaries. When one stepped foot into a Supreme's domain, they had the final say. There was a widespread saying in the ghost realm: Crimson rules the land, Black masters the waters. Crimson obviously referred to Crimson Rainsought Flower, who was known for his signature red clothing. Black was none other than Blackwater Demon Schwen. Watermaster Shang, you're really unlucky this time, Pei Ming said. But Demon Schwen isn't like the green ghost. He's not the type to look for trouble. Thankfully, we haven't strayed too far. Let's steer back quickly before we're discovered. The others stared at him. Well, why don't you change course then? Aren't you the one in charge of this ship? Pei Ming was equally confused. Did it not change course yet? The ship should follow my command on its own. It shouldn't require physical control. But the rudder didn't budge. With no other options, Pei Ming resorted to manual steering. But when his hand landed on the rudder, he furrowed his brows. Shi Lian went over as well. It won't move? It was impossible that Pei Ming lacked the strength for it. Shilian was fairly confident in his own strength, and yet he wasn't able to move it either. After examining the situation at hand, Ming Yi announced, "It must have gotten caught on something. I'll go down to take a look." Shi Qingchuan chimed in, "I'll go with you, Mingxiang." "Come back here," Shiwudu said sternly. "Don't go running around." Shi Qingchuan didn't dare disobey, knowing that his brother wouldn't be distracted or emotionally agitated while he was undergoing his trial. Shouldn't be, yeah. He returned to Shiwudu's side, shamefaced, leaving Ming Yi to investigate under the deck alone. Shilian wanted to help, but he knew he wasn't as capable as the Earthmaster when it came to building and repairs. Even if he went, he wouldn't be able to do much. As he gazed into the pitch-black sea that surrounded them, Shilian remembered something more important. Did any fishermen end up around here? Huacheng had extremely good eyesight and had been working alongside Shilian in the search and rescue efforts. He was the one who had discovered many of the stranded fishermen. He did a quick survey around them. "There shouldn't be," Huacheng concluded. Blackwater Demon Lair is in the South Sea. They wouldn't drift this far. And the area here has a barrier, so ordinary folk can't enter, barring special circumstances. Even if they did, they're beyond saving. Basically everything that drifts here sinks.
Mm.
The South Sea. He hadn't realized they drifted so far. Shilian tested his spiritual communication array, and sure enough, the connection was down. Their connection before had been spotty, but still usable. Now there was complete silence. Although the sea currently looked peaceful, there could be danger lurking in the abyssal depths. The sky was growing darker, and Shilian felt uneasy. "Since there aren't any stranded fishermen in these parts, if Lord Earthmaster can't repair it, why don't we abandon ship and head ashore? Lord Watermaster can return to the East Sea for his trial, and we can continue the search and rescue as well," he suggested. "That works," Pei Ming agreed and opened the cabin door. Yet when he pulled open the door, instead of dry land, he was met with the interior of an empty cabin. His face changed at the sight. "The teleportation array lost its power?" Huacheng laughed. "Isn't that obvious? If you can't use the spiritual communication array, why would the teleportation array work any better?" Pei Ming sent a sidelong glance at him. "Little friend, you seem quite calm for someone so young. Not worried at all, are you?" he commented flatly. "The ship drifted into ghost territory, and it's sinking as we speak," Shilian interrupted. "We can't leave even if we want to. Let's solve the problem at hand first." Shi Qingchuan called under the deck. "Mingxiang, how's the situation looking down there? Can you fix it?" Ming Yi's voice came from below. "Nothing's broken. The ship isn't caught on anything either. Something else made the ship lose power." "That would be Demon Xuan's spiritual field," Pei Ming stated gravely. As he was speaking, the ship dipped violently again. Shilian saw that water had already swallowed over half the ship. A normal boat would have given way to the waves by now, but this one still resisted and fought to stay afloat due to its divine providence. "There must be exceptions. It's impossible that everything sinks here," he insisted. "There must be something that won't sink." "There is," Huacheng said. All attention fell on him. With his arms folded, he elaborated lazily. "There is one type of wood that will not sink in the Blackwater Demon's Lair." Shilian guessed at several common special varieties of wood. "Sandalwood? Agar wood? Elm?" "Coffin wood," Huacheng answered. "Coffin wood?" "Yep," Huacheng said. "No one has returned alive after stumbling into the Blackwater Demon Lair, except for one individual. He was traveling home with the corpse of a family member. After his boat sank, he rode the coffin and drifted back to shore." Pei Ming raised his brow. "You sure know a lot, little friend." Huacheng mirrored his expression. "Nah, you just know too little, that's all." Shiwudu remained in his meditation position, and his hands maintained their seal, but he turned his attention to Huacheng and narrowed his eyes. "Pei Shang, I've been meaning to ask. Who exactly is this? Where is he from? Why is he with you?" "I'm afraid you'll have to ask His Highness about that," Pei Ming explained. "After all, he's someone from his palace." All right, Shi Jingxuan interrupted. "Enough of that who knows how much talk. Now that spells have lost their power, where do we get a coffin around here?" "That's easy," Pei Ming answered. "Come, Gugga will build one for you right now. I'll show you what it means to take things into your own hands and live well without anyone's help." "That won't work," Huacheng pointed out. It has to be a coffin that's carried a corpse. That was that then. It wasn't like they could build a coffin and then kill a person in the group to fill it. As they discussed the topic, the boat dipped again. The deck where they stood tilted and was almost level with the water's surface, and Shiwudu nearly toppled out of his prim and proper meditation pose. "Forget it. Let me handle this," he said coldly. He produced his fan and tapped it lightly against the center of his forehead, then fanned it out to reveal the character for water on the front and a wave pictogram made up of 3 curving lines on the back. He lifted his arm and issued a command. "Water, come forth!" Shilian felt the ship spring upward. The deck rose almost a meter above the waterline, and some sense of safety returned. "The Watermaster fan even controls the waters of the Blackwater Demon Lair?" he asked in surprise. "Not the water here," Huacheng corrected. "He channeled it from elsewhere." As it turned out, they hadn't ventured too far past the boundary of the Blackwater Demon Lair, so Shiwudu was still able to call forth nearby waters to lift the ship from underneath. "Beautifully done, Watermaster Shang," Pei Ming praised. "Now that the rudder is useless, the boat can't turn around. Quick, use the current to haul the ship back." Before Shiwudu could reply, the ship dipped once again. The Demon Lair's water refused to concede defeat and clashed with the current from the outside seas. The dip was ruthless this time, and the deck tilted even more. Losing balance, the crew slid to the bow of the ship. Although Shiwudu was born with gentlemanly, handsome looks, his personality was extremely imperious, and he refused to retreat. Sensing that something dared to oppose him, anger flashed across his face. He snapped his fan shut, and when he opened it again, the 3 wave lines had grown longer, and the outer current doubled in force. The ship was yanked up once again. Let me drink. With one force relentlessly dragging the boat down, and another stubbornly forcing it to rise, the ups and downs made it seem like a giant game of tug-of-war. The ship sailed onwards, then jolted to a stop, and it sank and rose with the motion. Waves crashed wildly around them, making seawater roll off the deck and onto the ship. It was an incredibly vexing situation. If ordinary folk were on board, they would be scared witless by now. Shilian gripped the edge tightly with one hand while he held onto Huacheng tightly with the other. "What's happening? The ship is turning!" he exclaimed. It was just as he said. The ship had started spinning. The faster it spun, the lower it sank. Shilian abruptly realized that the ship had been dragged into a giant maelstrom and was being sucked into its vortex. "Everyone, be careful," he warned. "The 2 forces of water are clashing." In the end, this was not Shiwudu's home turf. While the current he'd summoned from the outer seas was mighty, it weakened after crossing the boundary. It was a slight disadvantage in the fight against the tides of the Demon Lair. As expected, as soon as Shilian spoke, the ship was sucked into the vortex. Shilian tossed out Feng Xin at the last second and pulled Huacheng close. The 2 stepped onto the sword and flew up and away. At first he was worried that Feng Xin wouldn't have enough strength, but he let out a sigh of relief the moment they left the deck. Although it was shaky, at least the sword could still fly. They looked down from above to see that the whole area was painted a deep, terrifying black. Below them were 2 massive currents of obviously different colors, and it was their pursuit and clash with each other that had formed the colossal maelstrom. As the vortex swallowed the ship whole, the 2 water currents quickly separated. However, their battle was far from over. They continued to snap at each other like 2 venomous vipers, and each collision stirred angry waves. Shilian looked around. "Lord Windmaster? Lord Earthmaster? General Pei? Is everyone still here?" Shi Chuan's voice came from dozens of meters behind him. "Your Highness, we're over here." "Did you hop on your sword as well?" Shilian turned, and the scene that greeted him left him speechless. Ming Yi stood atop of the handle of a crescent shovel. Shi Chuan was seated on the head of the same shovel and was waving at Shilian. They didn't ride forth on a sword, but a shovel. The sight was unbearable to witness. Pei Ming's voice also called to them from nearby. "Where's Watermaster Shang?" Seeing that Pei Ming was on his sword alone, and there was no sign of the Watermaster, Shi Chuan cried out, "Guh? Guh?" "No need to panic. The Watermaster is the god of water. He can't have gone under," Shilian reassured him. But when he recalled the power of the whirlpool, he didn't dare underestimate its might. He turned to Huacheng. "Sunlang, hold on tight to my waist. Don't lose your grip and fall." Huacheng very obediently did so. Okay. But Gugga, there's something I have to tell you. What is it? Shilian asked. You can't fly in the Blackwater Demon Lair. It'll attract things. Not a moment later, a long, sharp cry pierced the air. A behemoth white creature broke through the water's surface and headed straight for Pei Ming. Pei Ming was a master swordsman, and he reflexively reached for his sword the moment he saw a monster attacking, only to belatedly realize said sword was under his feet. Luckily, his reaction was swift. He leapt into the air, grabbed his sword, and sliced the incoming creature in half. Before gravity could take hold, he flipped back onto the sword without a single hair out of place. He steadily flew upward and asked in a rather calm tone, "What was that?" After it was cleaved in half, the creature crashed back into the sea with a mournful wail. Shilian squinted to get a better look at the creature floating on the water's surface. Fish? It was certainly a fish, but this wasn't your average sea creature. It was a skeletal fish, over 15 meters in length, and half a dozen meters wide. This fish had neither flesh nor scales, only stark white bones that connected to a mouth filled with sharp teeth. He couldn't immediately determine if it was venomous, but its bite would surely be a pain in the butt regardless. Pei Ming flew higher. "Be careful, there's definitely more than one of those things," he warned. Sure enough, the moment he mentioned more than one, a second skeletal fish shot up from the depths. This time it headed straight for Ming Yi and Shi Qingxuan. Unfortunately, the Earthmaster wasn't a martial god and had little fighting power, and the Windmaster was now in mortal flesh. On top of this, Ming Yi was rusty when it came to shovel riding. Even though the two didn't get bitten, they were still knocked off balance and sent tumbling down to the waters below. As they fell, Shi Qingxuan cried out in despair, "Ming Shang, after today, make sure to use your spiritual device more, okay?" "Screw off," Ming Yi snapped at him. Let me drink.
These freaks.
The
They're trying
sillies.
to one-up each other.
The sillies. Pei Ming sighed and rushed over to rescue the two. Seeing his skilled form, Shilian knew that he would be able to handle it on his own. It's really not Earthmaster's fault, he thought. A shovel as a spiritual device? No heavenly official with any sense of shame would want to bring it out. Just then, a chill ran through his spine. Shilian regained his focus and said temperately, "Sanlang, hang on tight and watch out. Something's coming our way." "Okay." His arms tightened around his waist. Not long after, 4 watery walls shot up from the depths and surrounded them. 4 giant bonefish rose from the sea. Rather than fish, the ghastly behemoth skeletons were more like dragons. Sharp, jagged horns protruded from their skulls. Balls of indistinguishable ghost fire burned in their empty eye sockets like giant lanterns, and the 4 legs which each one had were tipped with claws. Their bodies were as thick as water vats, and at least a few dozen meters long. Their upper halves breached the water's surface, but it was impossible to guess the length of the rest that lurked beneath the waves. The creatures circled Shilian and Huacheng as they hung there in the air, leaving no room for escape. The pair couldn't fly upward. This was as high as Fang Xin could go. If they descended, the deathly silent ocean would greet them. Shilian sighed. "All right, who's first?" After a moment of consideration, he clasped his hands. "Together it is." Soon after, the bone dragon to the east took the initiative. It shrieked and charged forward. Shilian raised his hand and jabbed a finger in its direction. The bone dragon froze on the spot. It was a massive creature, but it was frozen in place by 1 sword, 1 man, and 1 finger. No matter how it struggled, it couldn't move another inch forward. Its tail and hind claws thrashed and raised walls of waves. The other 3 dragons lunged forward as well. Shilian curled his fingers into a claw, grabbed the frozen bone dragon by the horn, and lashed its body out like a whip. A loud whoosh tore through the sky. The 3 incoming dragons were skewered by the one Shilian thrashed out, and they howled as they collapsed into the sea in a mess of bones. Shilian watched the broken bones drift with the movement of the waves as he dusted off his hands and let out a breath. He turned around. "Sanlang, are you okay?" Huacheng smiled happily at him. "Under Gugga's protection, how could anything happen to me?" His response made Shilian feel embarrassed. Now that he thought about it, dealing with this sort of thing was also an easy task for Huacheng. How could he be anything but perfectly fine? So it sounded like Shilian was intentionally asking for praise. Just then the sword unexpectedly dipped. Before Shilian could even register what had happened, they were already falling rapidly. An instant later, they plunged headfirst into the icy cold water. They weren't dragged down by anything. Fang Shin was simply too old and couldn't hold out anymore. It needed to rest after straining itself for too long. The bone-chilling seawater rushed in from all directions. Shilian choked on water a few times, then quickly shut his mouth tight and tried to swim upwards. But the black water demon lair was as wicked as described. Though Shilian considered himself a fairly good swimmer, his body felt like a block of lead in these waters. No matter what he did, he couldn't float. He opened his eyes, but the water was as black as the world behind his eyelids, and he couldn't find Hua Cheng. He groped around with his hands, but he could only manage to grab hold of the sinking Fang Shin, not the person he sought. He started to grow anxious. The more anxious he was, the more sluggish his movements became, and the faster he sank. Thankfully, it wasn't long before a hand suddenly parted the fog. Shilian's eyes lit up. In the next second, someone grasped his hand, hugged his waist, and tugged him upwards. They ascended rapidly through the waters and broke the surface, and Shilian sucked in a few breaths. When he wiped his face, he found that he'd been brought up from the depths by none other than Hua Cheng. Drink?
His husband.
Remember when Hua Cheng was like, "No, I need to go with you on this one"?
Yeah.
Seems like he knows. It was quite strange. Technically, Hua Cheng was dead. As the saying goes, the dead are heavier, dead weight, so to speak. So he should have sunk faster than Shilian, but he floated lightly and effortlessly in the water. He lowered his head to look at Shilian. "Are you all right?" Shilian nodded, but this scene felt familiar and brought with it memories of a similar situation that had happened not so long ago. It made him blush. With one arm wrapped around Shilian, Hua Cheng used his free arm to leisurely glide through the water. "Hang on tight to me, Guga. You'll sink if I let you go." At a loss for words, Shilian blankly nodded several times. Not far from them the water stirred, and several sharp horns broke through the surface like the fins of a school of sharks. The horns rushed towards them with incredible speed. The 4 bone dragons that Shilian had knocked out were back for revenge. The bone dragons circled them, eyeing them with predatory gazes, but soon they could hold themselves back no longer and ferociously dove in. Shilian gripped Fang Shin tightly, but as he waited for the right moment to strike, he heard Hua Cheng click his tongue in annoyance. The bone dragons were already within arm's reach and ready to tear them apart, but upon hearing that sound, their killing intent immediately vanished. The fanged mouth that had been ready to snap Shilian's throat instead inched forward and nudged at Fang Shin, as if pecking it with tiny kisses. Shilian was utterly confused. He remained dumbfounded as the 4 bone dragons scampered away like they were scared, tails between their legs. Shilian was left speechless, and he floated there in sheer bewilderment, but Hua Cheng had already continued swimming. "Guga, you see that? If you plan on raising pets in the future, definitely don't consider those things. They're useless trash." "Pets? No, I don't need any pets," Shilian replied weakly. All of a sudden, a water dragon hurtled up from under the water's surface and shot into the sky. Shilian looked up and saw Shiwudu seated on top of the creature's head. His hands were clasped together in an aggressive attack hand seal, and his face was dark with hostility, as if he was fighting vigorously against some unseen force. The once calm, once peaceful sea was now tossing and turning. Shilian called out, "Lord Windmaster! Lord Earthmaster! General Pei, where are you?" Borrowing the moonlight, he was able to scan his surroundings. Instead of finding his comrades, he found himself engulfed by a huge shadow. Shilian turned his head sharply and his eyes widened. It was an enormous wave, as tall as a city wall. It engulfed the skies as it lunged his way. In the next moment, he was awash in complete darkness. Let me drink. Oh, I know what's about to happen. He drifted with the ebb and flow of the ocean for a long time. Shilian finally opened his eyes. While he didn't sit up, he could feel beneath him that he'd arrived on land. As he lay there, regaining his strength, he lifted an arm and saw that his hand had become wrinkled from the prolonged soak. He felt something hard under his waist, and when he tilted his head to look, he realized that the object was Hua Cheng's arm. Hua Cheng was lying right next to him. By the look of things, he had never once let go. Surprisingly, even though Shilian had woken up, Hua Cheng had not. His eyes were tightly shut. Shilian quickly sat up and nudged him gently. Sanlang? Sanlang? Hua Cheng didn't respond. Shilian nudged him again while surveying their surroundings. They were on land, but it was a densely forested island with no signs of civilization in sight. No docks, no people at all. It seemed like an isolated island, not the mainland. The most surprising thing of all was that it was already daylight. They must have floated all night. Where did they end up? Even after repeated nudging, Hua Cheng was still deep asleep and hadn't moved an inch. Ghosts couldn't drown, so Shilian trusted that Hua Cheng had not done so, but there was no guarantee that he hadn't been secretly wounded by something else, such as those barbed, poisonous bonefish. Shilian patted Hua Cheng down to check for wounds, feeling up his chest, his arms, all the way down his legs. But other than coming to the conclusion that Hua Cheng had a truly fine body, he made no notable finds. Shilian blanked for a bit, then began to panic a
That's
little.
crazy.
Sanlang, don't joke around, he mumbled. No response. In a moment of panic, Shilian pressed his head against Hua Cheng's chest to search for a heartbeat before he remembered that ghosts had no such thing. To his surprise, he actually heard a steady thump. Taken aback, a thought came to him. Hua Cheng shouldn't be able to drown in his true form, but he was presently in the form of a 17 or 18-year-old human youth. So did the same rules apply? Although he still didn't think that Hua Cheng was the sort to overlook such things, there was really no other option at hand. He couldn't be roused even after Shilian pressed his chest a few times. After a brief moment of hesitation, Shilian slowly reached out and cupped Hua Cheng's face with gentle hands. He was excessively good-looking. With his eyes
Oh
closed, his
my
sharp features softened into something
god.
gentler. He held Hua Cheng like this. He gazed at him and thought about what he was about to do next. It made it extremely difficult for Shilian to calm his heart. He debated for a long time, then looked around. There was no one there. He looked back at Hua Cheng, still unconscious. In the end, he made up his mind. Gritting his teeth, he whispered a simple phrase. I apologize in advance. His voice was practically shaking as he said it. He clapped his hands together in silent prayer, then bent down. With his eyes shut tight, he pressed his lips against Hua Cheng's. Hua Cheng's eyes
Whoa,
snapped open. That's the end of the chapter. The
dude.
next chapter is the coffin. Can I read it?
Yeah, sure.
Chapter 63. Close the casket, coffin, boat enters the ghost sea. However, since Shilian was feeling both overly nervous and overly guilty, his eyes were shut tight and he remained completely unaware. The last time they had
Oh
exchanged
my
air, it was Hua
god.
Cheng who initiated it. He was domineering, and the kiss was deep. Shilian didn't dare recall the event after the fact.
Wow.
Shilian
He
didn't
was domineering.
Shilian didn't dare recall the event after the fact, only remembering that his lips had been swollen and numb. This time he was
Uh-huh.
taking the lead and he was very cautious. He placed his lips very softly upon Hua Cheng's, as if he was afraid he'd accidentally wake him if he used too much force. But in retrospect, wasn't waking Hua Cheng his exact goal? If his kiss was too light and air leaked out between their lips, wouldn't this be for naught? Shilian kept his eyes closed and silently rattled off excerpts of Tao Te Ching as he pulled away to take a breath, then pressed his lips against Hua Cheng's once more. This time the kiss was much deeper. Shilian fully captured Hua Cheng's thin, cool lips and gently blew in air.
Oh my
His
god.
eyes were closed through the whole process, not daring to look. After delivering 5 or 6 breaths, he thought he should push down on Hua Cheng's chest a few times, but the moment he opened his eyes, he found himself staring squarely into Hua Cheng's own widened ones. And then there's art.
Oh shit.
Hold on. There's also like an animatic of this scene that's so funny. I'll show you later.
Whoa.
And then it says dot 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 and then dot dot dot. Shilian's hands still cupped Hua Cheng's cheeks and their mouths only just parted. Soft, gentle numbness still remained on their lips. It was like the two had turned into stone statues, as if they would shatter with an errant breeze. Shilian's petrification was expected, but Hua Cheng, who always stayed carefree when faced with all manner of things, was equally stunned. Shilian didn't know how he managed not to drop dead on the spot from all the blood rushing to his head. It took him a good moment to say, Sanlang, you're awake. Hua Cheng didn't speak. Shilian dropped his hands from Hua Cheng's cheeks at once and leapt meters back. No, 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 no. It's not what you think. I just wanted to. To what? Deliver air? Did ghosts need air? If he said that out loud, even Shilian himself wouldn't believe it. Shilian was stumped. Hua Cheng quickly pushed himself up and extended a hand towards him, looking as though he was also forcing himself to keep steady. Your Highness, you... Just calm down first. Shilian clutched his head. He was a mess from head to toe. Finally, he put his hands together as if in prayer and gave Hua Cheng a deep, abrupt bow. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Having shouted his apologies, he turned around and bolted, fleeing the scene. Hua Cheng finally snapped out of it and scrambled to his feet to chase after him, shouting as he did, Your Highness! Shilian covered his ears and screamed his penitence as he ran,
Oh
I'm
my
sorry! And then
god.
his inner monologue is, Die, just die. If I can't die, just dig a hole somewhere and pretend to be dead. His mad dash carried him into the depths of the forest. As he ran, something resembling a sharp arrow came flying at him. Shilian might have been rattled to the core, but his skill did not suffer for it. With a sweep of his hand, he caught a bone spur. He came to an abrupt stop and looked to where the attack had come from, but there was nothing there, only rustling shrubs. With danger lurking in the bushes, he calmed at once and whirled around to hurry back. Sanlang! Hua Cheng had been trailing close behind, and Shilian's sudden change of direction almost sent him right into his arms. Shilian grabbed Hua Cheng's hand and dashed out the woods. Run, there's something in the forest! Hua Cheng had at first been chasing after him, and he was now being dragged back where they came. Once they made it back to the beach, Shilian let out a breath of relief. We weren't followed. Phew, thank goodness. There are some little things on this island, but don't worry, they won't follow us here, Hua Cheng commented. Hearing this, Shilian suddenly realized. How could Hua Cheng possibly be afraid of those things? He looked down and found that he was still clutching his companion's hand. Shilian froze once more, then hurriedly let go and jumped away.
Buddy.
Now that there was some distance between them, they fell silent for a moment. Then Hua Cheng sighed and tugged at his collar. Thank goodness Gaga rescued me earlier. Human bodies really are quite inconvenient. I end up choking down mouthfuls of salty water just from taking a dip in the sea. Disgusting. Shilian wasn't that stupid. He knew Hua Cheng was giving him an easy way out. But he went along with it, of course. It's nothing, don't worry about it, he mumbled vaguely, head bowed. After a pause, Hua Cheng added, But Gaga didn't do it correctly. Flustered, Shilian said awkwardly, Did I not?
Whoa.
I thought I only needed to blow in some air. Yeah, that's not the correct method, Hua Cheng replied. Don't do this to anyone else in the future, otherwise. Otherwise, not
This
only Otherwise, not only wouldn't he save a life, but he might just end a life. Hua Cheng spoke so seriously that Shilian felt rather ashamed. Good thing he'd never tried doing this before, or else he really would have committed a sin.
this
I
is
won't, he hurriedly
insane.
swore. Hua Cheng nodded, then grinned. Although Shilian really wanted to ask Hua Cheng for instructions on how it should be done, he dared not dwell any longer on the subject, and made a mental note of it instead. He looked around. Is this island really deserted? No trace of humans at all? Of course, Hua Cheng replied. This is Blackwater Island, at the heart of Blackwater Demon Lair. He stated that with complete confidence. Crimson Rain sought flower, and ships seeking black water. The two supremes seemed to know each other. Sun Lang, have you been here before? Shilian asked. Hua Cheng shook his head. Never, but I know of this island. Let me drink. Shilian knitted his brows. I wonder where Lord Windmaster and the others drifted. Perhaps they're here as well. This was the Blackwater Demon Lair located in the South Sea. It was someone else's territory. Pei Ming's main domain was in the north. The Earthmaster wasn't a martial god, and there was no need to elaborate on the Windmaster's condition. If anything happened and they incurred the ire of Blackwater Demon Xuan, the only one who could fight back was the Watermaster, and there was no knowing when Shiwudu's heavenly tribulation would hit. The current situation wasn't looking good. Sunlang, does Blackwater Demon Xuan have a temper? Shilian asked. What would he do if heavenly officials accidentally intruded on his domain and entered his home? Hard to say, Hua Cheng said. But Gaga has surely heard the saying, crimson rules the land, black masters the waters. Even I have to watch my step in the Blackwater demon lair. This wasn't simply because it was the heart of Blackwater's domain, but also because they were both supremes. It was best for Hua Cheng to give his fellow Ghost King some face so they could remain cordial.
Face.
Then we'd best leave as quickly as possible, Shilian said. Though they didn't re-enter the forest, they did a circuit of the island's edge. Shilian called out a few times, but he didn't hear any response from the Windmaster or anyone else. They probably didn't drift here, Hua Cheng surmised. The two returned to the beach. The surface of the sea was still heavy with a gloom. Shilian picked up a piece of wood and threw it far into the distance. The wood should have floated, yet it instantly sank upon impact with the water. Shilian looked back at the dense forest. It seems like it'd be useless to build a boat. The teleportation array won't work either. How are we going to leave the island? Who says it would be useless? Hua Cheng said. But only coffin wood that housed the deceased can float in the Blackwater demon lair. He trailed off when he realized it. Coffin wood. There were trees everywhere, and there was a deceased person right before his eyes. Sure enough, Hua Cheng smiled. Won't it work fine once I'm settled inside? Although he smiled, Shilian's heart was squeezed strangely by the statement. Hua Cheng flattened his palm, and the scimitar Ming appeared in his hands. Having committed to the endeavor, they went straight to work collecting materials. They didn't venture deep into the woods, so they didn't encounter anything hiding in the shadows. It took no time at all for them to chop down a number of trees. A whole day of labor went by in the blink of an eye, and the sky grew dimmer overhead. The two divided the work, but competed with each other to scoop up more tasks, so their efficiency was amazingly high. By evening, the coffin was essentially complete. Shilian had only eaten half a steamed bun during this entire journey and was bitterly starving. But the sooner the coffin was made, the sooner they could leave, so he only excused himself to catch some fish after the coffin had taken basic shape. Yet how could there be fish within the waters of the Blackwater demon lair? Returning empty-handed, Shilian instead went to the edge of the forest and picked some wild fruit from the safer areas. But to his surprise, by the time he got back, Hua Cheng had already started a small campfire. He sat by the fire with one hand supporting his cheek, and the other holding a stick with a wild hare forked on it, which he was roasting over the fire. Get you a man who takes care of you.
Okay.
He'd already cleaned the wild hare, and it was roasted perfectly, dripping with juice, crisp and golden, the smell fragrant and incredibly alluring. Once he noticed Shilian, Hua Cheng smiled and passed the stick over. Shilian traded him some wild fruit for it. These are all edible. Both were still wet and dripping. They were soaked in seawater and sweat. However, there was a tacit understanding between them, and neither even suggested stripping out of their clothes to dry them. The meat of the wild hare was crispy on the outside but tender on the inside. Shilian could feel the lingering heat from the fire in his teeth as he took a tentative bite, but quickly found that he couldn't stop eating. He savored the flavor that lingered on his lips. Even as he stuffed himself, Shilian conscientiously divided the meat in half and gave Hua Cheng his due portion. San Long has such amazing skills, he sighed in awe. Hua Cheng laughed. Really? I thank Gogo for the compliment. It's true, Shilian said. I've never met anyone better than you at anything, whether it's carpentry or cooking. That noble, gracious, special someone really lucked out. As he said that, he acted like he was very focused on eating, though there wasn't any response from Hua Cheng. It was a while before Hua Cheng replied quietly, that I got to meet that person. I'm the one that lucked out.
Oh my god.
Shilian didn't know what to say and tried to focus even harder on eating. Only after several minutes did he register that Hua Cheng was calling him. Guga. Guga. Dazed, Shilian replied. Huh? Hua Cheng passed him a handkerchief, and Shilian suddenly realized he'd been chomping too hard on the meat. His mouth and chin were covered in grease, and he looked extremely silly. He felt quite embarrassed as he took the handkerchief to wipe himself clean. Hua Cheng passed the other half of the roast hare as well. Guga must be starving. Don't rush yourself. Shilian took it, though he was a little dismayed, he still broached the subject in the end. San Long, just what kind of person is your special someone? He asked. Why haven't you won them over yet? He genuinely believed that if Hua Cheng wanted someone, there was no one on earth who could resist his advances. But that day, Hua Cheng had said he hadn't won them over yet. Shilian couldn't help but feel rather glum, and an odd feeling grew toward this individual the Ghost King fancied. It was probably because he thought the other party lacked taste, or perhaps he thought they were taking Hua Cheng for granted. It's all right if Gogo finds it funny, Hua Cheng replied. But truth is, I'm afraid. Whether it was out of a sense of injustice or a fear that Hua Cheng was putting himself down, Shilian responded in a serious tone. What's there to be afraid of? You're the Supreme Ghost King, Crimson Rain Sought Flower. Hua Cheng laughed out loud. What a shitty Ghost King. If I was really that formidable, I wouldn't have been so powerless when people strung me up and beat me centuries ago. You shouldn't say it like that, Shilian said. Everyone has to go through trials to grow up. But even as he said that, he realized he'd never experienced humiliation of that sort before his first ascension. He cleared his throat lightly. That person saw me at my worst, Hua Cheng said. Then I'm very envious of that, Shilian replied. Hearing him say so, Hua Cheng gazed over. Shilian stopped eating and said gently, But I can sort of understand your feelings. After a pause, he continued. There was a period in my own life that wasn't easy. Back then, I'd always think about how wonderful it would be if someone could still love me for who I was, even if they saw me rolling in the dirt and couldn't get up. Though I don't know if there's anyone out there like that, and I'm scared of showing that part of myself too. But if it's someone Sun Lung yearns for, I think that even if they saw you at your worst, they wouldn't say something like, you're not so great after all. His face grew solemn. To me, the one basking in infinite glory is you. The one fallen from grace is also you. What matters is you, not the state of you. I admire Sun Lung very much. I want to understand your everything. So I'm very envious that someone has already met that version of you so early on. That kind of affinity can only come by chance. It can't be begged for. And whether that bond should live on is 3 parts fate and 7 parts courage. The campfire crackled, and the two remained silent for a good while. Shilian softly cleared his throat, and he rubbed his forehead. Have I said too much? How embarrassing. No, what you said was good, very right, Hua Cheng replied. Shilian let out a breath of relief and quickly returned to eating the meat. It's not just that. There are many other reasons, Hua Cheng added. Despite Hua Cheng's assurance, Shilian felt like he'd said far too much and wanted to stop discussing this subject immediately. He couldn't understand it. Why did he ramble on like that? And why did he encourage Hua Cheng to bravely pursue his beloved? If it wasn't like he was the heavenly official who presided over marriage, he could only give a mumble as a reply. After his speech, the air between the two seemed rather delicate, and they quickly finished eating to continue their labor. Soon the coffin was officially complete. Hua Cheng pushed the newly constructed coffin into the water and hopped in to sit inside. Although it was a long, heavy chunk of wood, it really did float, not sink. They didn't make the coffin particularly wide, and as Shilian lifted his robes to step in, he felt like there wasn't enough space to sit. Muffled roars of thunder boomed above them, and steely clouds rolled in. Violet flashes of lightning streaked from the skies, and their explosive noise startled the ears. Thin threads of rain began to fall, and the downpour only grew heavier by the minute. It seemed a storm was approaching. Fortunately, the two didn't slack off while building, and had crafted a cover for the coffin as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken long for it to flood with rainwater and sink into the depths. The two met eyes, and Shilian softly mumbled, Sorry. Hua Cheng didn't say anything more and lay down inside the coffin. Shilian climbed in fully and pulled the cover over them. As if a candle had been blown out, they sank into darkness. The coffin floated in the open water and drifted errantly for a while. Pouring rain beat down on the cover, and the two spoke not a word inside. Their bodies were pressed hard against one another, but it couldn't be helped. They were squished into such a narrow space. The waves pushed and pulled them, flipped and flopped them. Shilian used one hand to push against the edge of the coffin to steady himself, trying his best to make more room. His head knocked lightly against the wood in the motion. With the motion, and Hua Cheng reached out to cradle the back of his head with one hand, shielding it from further bumps. He rested the other hand on his back and pressed him to his chest. Shilian didn't even dare to breathe harshly. Sun Lung, how about we switch it up? Switch what? Hua Cheng asked. You on top and me on the bottom, Shilian replied. Top? Bottom? Isn't it all the same? Hua Cheng asked. Shilian was afraid he was too heavy. Our journey will take at least a day. Your body is only 17 or 18 right now, isn't it? And I'm a martial god. I'm very heavy. Before he could finish his sentence, he was forced to exclaim, Sanlong, don't just suddenly turn big. Although it was hard to see in the dark, they were pressed together so tightly that Shilian could feel Huacheng's body transform. While the change was minute, he
Bruh.
still sensed it and assumed Huacheng had probably transformed back to his true form. Sure enough, when Huacheng spoke again, his laugh was deeper, truly his real voice. Shilian lay helplessly on his chest, but after the change, the nebulous awkwardness lightened a bit. Hoping to shift his body and change position, he raised his leg slightly, but Huacheng abruptly stopped laughing. Don't move, he said grimly. Shilian froze. There was a loud noise, and the coffin sank violently. Shilian was
He
bewildered.
freaked out.
Shilian was bewildered. What's going on? Soon after, there was another roaring sound, and the two were forcibly tossed around inside the coffin. It seemed their vessel had rolled over. Thank goodness there weren't any leaks, but that couldn't be guaranteed if they were attacked again. Huacheng pressed him down. Something's got its eye on this coffin boat. As soon as he spoke, the two felt familiar weightlessness, and their positions abruptly changed from lying to upright. The coffin boat rose up, then swiftly plunged, flipping over once more. Huacheng's arms were locked in a vice grip around Shilian's waist, with one hand still shielding his head. Hold on tight to me, he shouted. If they were in an open space, Shilian could manage even if the spinning were 3 times as violent. The problem was they were trapped inside a narrow, tight space. They couldn't stretch out their limbs, and they had no idea what was happening outside. All he could do was tense and alert while anxiety rolled within. What if the coffin breaks? Shilian wondered. Don't worry. Even if it breaks, I'm here. You won't sink, Huacheng reassured. They were firmly pressed against each other, and Huacheng nearly brushed his lips against his hair when he spoke. Shilian could even feel the slight tremble of his Adam's apple. This made his mind start to wander, but his attention was stolen again by another wave of violent rolling. The boat was like a toy being jostled about by a toddler, and it shook and swung ceaselessly. With no other choice, Shilian embraced Huacheng tightly with one hand, bracing the other on the coffin wall. Through the chaos, the two were hoisted and dropped, flipped and flopped into who knows how many different positions. Their bodies collided and rubbed together in countless ways. Even though Huacheng had
Okay.
the appearance of a young man, only after his tumble did Shilian realize that Huacheng was solid and hard from top to bottom. Shilian was seeing stars from the torment. When the shaking finally eased for a moment, he found that Huacheng was now on top of him. He pressed down heavily and crushed the breath out of him. Shilian managed to raise his hand and grabbed onto the strong forearm beside his body that Huacheng was using to prop himself up. His head spun and he groaned softly. Is it over yet? For some reason, Huacheng didn't respond. Before Shilian finished his thought, his breathing hitched. He had very suddenly noticed that a certain part of his body had experienced a somewhat unusual shift. In that split second, Shilian felt more incredulous than he'd se- than if he'd seen an iron tree bloom, and at least his mind wouldn't be so blank in such a scenario. Mortifying shame and embarrassment battered him more violently than the tempest battering the coffin outside. Shilian closed his knees in a panic, and that didn't appear to be the right move. It seemed he'd touched something he shouldn't have, and it elicited
Oh!
it elicited a brusque grunt from Huacheng. Don't move! The grunt was deep and sharp, and Shilian hurriedly flattened his legs again. If he didn't close his
Oh
knees,
my
he was scared Huacheng
god.
might notice his body's reaction, in which case he might as well just smash his head against the coffin and die. He could have explained it away as an unavoidable natural reaction, but there was already that awkward incident on the island. You could say it was unintentional once or twice, but how could he possibly explain himself after the third or fourth time? Trapped in such a dire situation, Shilian blurted, "No, Sanlong, don't touch me." There was a brief silence. Then Huacheng said gravely, "Very well, let's break out of here." It was like he had been absolved. Shilian cried, "Go!" There was another vicious attack of weightlessness. The coffin that contained the two was thrust into the air. Just as it was, Huacheng and Shilian smacked their palms on either side of the coffin in unison, and it shattered instantly. The two broke free and leapt out under the moonlight. Shilian looked back and saw a giant water dragon dangling the broken pieces of the coffin from its mouth. It let out a roar beneath the pouring rain, baring its sharp teeth as if raging at the empty coffin it had presumed was full of food. This water dragon must have been thrashing the coffin boat about with its mouth, snapping it here and there, and twisting it. The coffin boat had drifted at sea for a while, but the water dragon had dragged it back inland. The two landed back on Blackwater Island. There were two new figures on the beach, Watermaster Wudu and General Pei. Shiwudu's hands were still in his seal, and he faced the storm like he was trying to call the water dragon over. Pei Ming patted his shoulder. Watermaster Shang, just take it easy, will you? This round is over, so who knows when the next time will come. Save your energy for now. Turned out the sudden pouring rain was the accompaniment to Shiwudu's heavenly tribulation. The storm was calming down, and Shiwudu whirled around with a flick of his sleeves to regard Hua Cheng and Shilian. What's with you two? He questioned. Pei Ming just had to give his input as well. Your Highness, why don't you two explain yourselves? What's going on? What were you two doing in there? When the coffin boat exploded, their tight embrace was put on display for all to see. Shilian blinked. He was about to speak when he abruptly realized that after tumbling around inside the narrow coffin boat, their hair was mussed and their clothes were disheveled. The two of them looked as improper as one could imagine. Shilian wiped the rain off his face and found that his cheeks were burning. Hua Cheng took a step forward to shield him. A moment later, Shilian softly cleared his throat. Nothing's going on, just the coffin was too small. Shiwudu was puzzled. I wasn't asking about that. Pei Ming pointed at the leftover wood pieces they left behind on the beach. You made the coffin yourselves, right? Why didn't you build a bigger one? The coffin boat was designed by both Hua Cheng and Shilian, and it seemed neither of them had considered making it bigger at the time. Shilian could only laugh awkwardly. You're right. Did my lords only just drift to this island? Yes, Pei Ming
My
replied.
God.
Watermaster Shang battled the current of the Blackwater Demon Lair, and only just made it here. Didn't expect to see a coffin sailing the waters of the Blackwater Demon Lair. What a curious sight. Shilian could feel himself tense, and he forced a smile. Curious indeed. You. Shiwudu turned to Hua Cheng and narrowed his eyes. On the ship, didn't you say that the only thing that doesn't sink in the Blackwater Demon Lair is wood that has carried the dead? Pei Ming drew his sword. Yeah, he said leisurely. There's the wood, but where's the dead? Hua Cheng smiled too. If you're so concerned with who's dead here, I suggest you go kill yourself. Pei Ming pointed his blade at him. Such arrogance, as expected
That's
of Crimson
crazy.
Rain-sought Flower. As suspected, he had already guessed. Hua Cheng burst out laughing, and seeing that a fight was about to start, Shilian stepped protectively in front of Hua Cheng. My lords, please calm yourselves. You can be completely assured that San Lang is on this journey out of the generosity alone. San Lang? Pei Ming wondered. I've never heard of Lord Crimson Rain-sought Flower ranking among the boys of some house. And generosity? Your Highness, are you sure that's the word to describe his intentions? Shiwudu had to stand in the spotlight at all times,
Whoa.
so he pushed Pei Ming aside. Are you the one who's been meddling this entire trip? He demanded sharply. What is your intention in luring us here to the Blackwater Demon Lair? Where's Qing Xuan? This is someone else's territory. Do you think I want to be here? Hua Cheng answered. Shilian was already used to these kinds of situations and changed the subject with practiced ease. Has Lord Windmaster not been found yet? Didn't General Pei go looking for him and the Earthmaster? Pei Ming shrugged. I almost fished them up, but one of Watermaster Shang's waves came along and washed them away. Mind your misleading tongue, Pei Shang, Shiwudu snapped. If I didn't raise waves and simply allowed those things in the water to keep attacking over and over, you wouldn't have been able to find them in the first place. Calm down, Shilian soothed quickly. Lord Windmaster is with Lord Earthmaster, so there shouldn't be any need to worry. Shiwudu humped. Lord Earthmaster? What good is that Earthmaster? Mediocre and unaccomplished. He's not a martial god either, and his spiritual powers aren't as strong as Qing Xuan's. He trailed off when he seemed to remember that Shi Qingxuan no longer possessed any spiritual powers. His face fell, and he grew silent. Every profession has its experts, Shilian thought. Although Ming Yi wasn't a martial god, and his spiritual powers weren't terribly strong, he wasn't as bad as the Watermaster described. Besides, the skills the Earthmaster demonstrated at Banyue Pass weren't bad at all. Even if he wasn't the best, he wasn't the worst either. Don't worry too much yet, Pei Ming assured as well. Lord Earthmaster should be able to take care of things as long as they don't run into Demon Xuan. Hua Cheng laughed. Your heavenly tribulation has pursued you all the way to the Blackwater Demon Lair. You guys have already made a huge mess of his territory. Do you really think the master of the domain hasn't noticed? Shiwudu's face twitched, and he retrieved a golden longevity locket pendant from under the collar of his robes. Watermaster Shang, did something happen? Pei Ming asked. The golden longevity locket vibrated in Shiwudu's palm. Qing Xuan is close by, and he's injured. Shilian took a look at the golden pendant. It looked exactly the same as the one Shi Qingxuan had been wearing that day, the one he removed to build the protection array and left behind in the end. Is Lord Windmaster still wearing his longevity locket? I remember he had removed it before. I picked it up and put it on him again, Shiwudu said. The two longevity lockets had been forged by the brothers' golden essence. When they were near one another and one was hurt, the locks would call out to each other. The closer they were, the stronger the resonance. This was a spiritual attribute of the locks and not a spell, so it was unaffected by the demon layer's spiritual field. Shiwudu removed the longevity locket pendant from his neck and dangled the chain from his hand. He held his arm out straight and slowly turned in a circle. When he faced a certain direction, the vibration of the golden locket abruptly grew stronger. It was calling them into the forest, towards the unfathomably deep heart of the lonely island. Looks like Qing Xuan is here, Shiwudu said grimly. With that, he strode into the forest with large strides. Naturally, Pei Ming followed along. Shilian thought about their present situation. Since the Wind and Earth Masters were both on the island, and the Wind Masters seemed to be injured, finding them should be their priority. They could worry about the rest later. My lords, there are little ghost minions hiding in the forest. Be careful of ambushes. Hua Cheng came along as well. Shilian wanted to grab his hand, but he remembered his disgraceful state in the coffin boat, and his outstretched hand shrank back in spite of himself. In the end, he tugged a corner of Hua Cheng's sleeve, not daring to look at his face. Pei Ming, however, looked back frequently and appeared to be very interested. Your Highness and Crimson Rain-Sought Flower, the two of you sure are stuck together like glue. A ghost king like yourself, following us so openly. Aren't you even going to try to avoid suspicion? What is General Pei saying? Shilian replied easily. Under these circumstances, it's much less suspicious if he comes along. If my lords run into any danger, you may suspect him. How else can he How else can he hope to clear his name? He made it to the rank of Supreme, so what difference does it make if he's with us or not? Wouldn't it be easy for him to create a clone? Pei Ming said. He had just spoken when a sharp sound tore through the air. Pei Ming raised his hand and caught an arrow. So there is something. That was close. Watermaster Shang, be careful. Before he finished, there were more swishing sounds, and several more arrows came flying towards him. Cling clang. Pei Ming swept his sword and wondered, what the heck? Shiwudu laughed out loud. Bei Shang, I think you'd best watch yourself instead. Then he quickened his pace. An ambush of arrows was nothing to be afraid of. It was simply an annoyance. Pei Ming irritably flattened a patch of shrubbery and soon plucked out a few more little minions. You guys got guts. The ghosts were scrawny and sallow-skinned, the lowest of lackeys. They were terrified of the general and cowered in little balls as they hung from his hand, begging for mercy non-stop. They were gatekeepers, after all, so attacking intruders was what they had to do. Pei Ming let them go after a few threats. When they ran into more cunning and vicious minions later on, Pei Ming squashed those ghoulies into a ball and dribbled it as they made their way. The four of them brushed away branches and pushed their way through bushes, hiking through the dense forest for what seemed like ages. As they walked, the resonant cries of the golden lock in Shiwudu's hand grew louder and louder. Finally, they reached a large clearing at the heart of the forest. At the center of it was a lake, and the four walked towards it. Suddenly, Pei Ming spoke up. Crimson Rain-Sought Flower, if you continue with those pranks, I won't tolerate you much longer. Both Hua Cheng and Shilian looked at him, then at each other. Pei Ming frowned. If you want to fight, then challenge me like a man. I'm not like those 33 heavenly officials. I'm not afraid of you. Shoving me around is pointless. Hua Cheng arched his brows. Gege, you have to believe me. I've got nothing to do with this. Shilian intervened. General Pei, he doesn't play meaningless pranks like that. Pei Ming was doubtful. Really? Shilian grew alarmed. Be careful, something else on this island might be stirring up trouble. Pei Ming stopped talking. Right then, Shiwudu slowed his pace. It's here. The golden longevity locket seemed to cry hardest here, meaning Qi Qingxuan was somewhere close. But this area was open with nowhere to hide. There was nothing here besides the lake. Could there be an underground palace? Pei Ming wondered. Shiwudu stared at the surface of the water, and Shilian said, or it could be at the bottom of the lake. But a lake on Blackwater Island shouldn't be entered carelessly, lest one never come up again. The surface of the lake was calm and unrippled. It looked like a giant mirror, reflecting the blanched moon that hung high in the starless, cloudless night sky. The four circled the edge of the lake. Shilian was still weighing options about how to investigate the lake bottom when a terrified scream ripped through the night air. Shiwudu was leading the group, and Pei Ming was bringing up the rear. The three in front looked back to see that the screamer was the little ghost that Pei Ming had captured on the road. Its scrawny, bony body stood in place, but its head was gone, and black blood spurted almost 3 meters from its neck. Its head was flying through the air, screeching. "General Pei, why did you kill it so suddenly?" Shilian asked. Pei Ming, however, exclaimed, "No!" Before he could explain, his body crumpled, and he dropped to one knee. Hua Cheng laughed. "There's no need for such a grand apology." Pei Ming's expression was stark bewilderment. "Water Master Shang, watch out!" he shouted. Watch out for what, though? Other than the four of them by the lake, there was nothing here. It was as if Pei Ming had been bound by something invisible. Shiwudu was rushing over to help when a chilling light flashed in front of him. He dodged just in time, though the attack still managed to draw a trail of blood across one of his cheeks. He wiped it with his hand and his face changed. Shilian stood firm in front of Hua Cheng to shield him. "An invisibility spell?" Pei Ming finally broke free of his formless constraints. "Gather round! Don't split up!" he shouted. But Shiwudu didn't care. The moment he heard the longevity locket started crying again, he charged towards the lake, frantically calling out for his brother. "Qing Xuan! Qing Xuan!" It was mayhem, but amidst the ruckus, Shilian noticed something quite peculiar. The area along the lake shore was open and empty, with no notable landmarks to be seen. But the shore reflected on the lake's surface showed a different story. In the reflection, a charcoal black building loomed on the edge of the water. The building was cold and sinister, more like a prison than a place where someone lived. It had no door, only a set of windows set high in the walls and sealed by unforgiving iron bars. A pale white hand reached from between those iron bars, waving desperately like it was begging for help. Julian's head shot up, and he looked to the shore opposite him. There was nothing there aside from Shiwudu darting around with the longevity locket. When he looked down again, the reflection clearly showed a sinister iron prison. Shiwudu was right in front of the building, but he couldn't see it. "My lords!" Shilian blurted out. "I found it! Look!" Just then his pupil shrank. Something new was reflected within Blackwater Lake. A shadowy figure had appeared soundlessly behind him and Hua Cheng. That's the end of the chapter. Dude, we gotta watch the audio drama of the scene. It's so good.